Hello and welcome to In Conversation, a partnership between LabourList and the Fabian Society. I'm Emma Burnell, the editor of LabourList, and I am so delighted today to welcome our guest, Baroness Ayesha Hazarika.
Hello, Emma.
So Ayesha, you've had an incredible career, a very varied career as well.
Bit mad.
You've worked for Gordon Brown, Harriet Harman, Ed Miliband. You've been a stand-up comic. You're now a broadcaster as well as a baroness. Just all the B's. Welcome to In Conversation. Obviously, we probably had a whole different conversation planned, but those of you who aren't friends of LabourList yet, and I'm sure you will be joining the Friends of LabourList scheme very soon, will not be watching live, but you won't know that we are recording this on the 12th, gosh, where does the time go, of May, a day that's had a lot of drama in it. We're seeing a leadership in crisis, people going in and out of number 10. Now, I've been a journalist for quite a while, but I've never worked on the inside. So, Ayesha, you've worked for Ed Miliband for a long time while he was leader of the opposition, not without his critics at times. What's it like inside? How does it feel?
When there's a crisis like this, it's really, really tough. And I've got lots of complicated feelings about everything that's happening now, as I'm sure all of us do. You know, it's possible to hold many different thoughts in your head at the same time. Very important to remember that.
Absolutely.
But I have a lot of sympathy for people who are really deep in the bunker right now, because they are having a really, really difficult time. They're fighting on so many fronts. And I think there's the sort of political handling of the situation, which we can sort of, get into. But there's a huge amount of raw emotion as well, because you feel very isolated. It feels very lonely. When people are attacking you, attacking your premiere, there's a feeling of shame as well, because it's like, oh my goodness, obviously, what have we done wrong, and why is everybody coming for us? And there's confusion, there's a lot of panic, there's hurt, there's pain, there's shame, there's a maelstrom of emotions, and you're trying to sort of project a very outwardly confident, bullish, kind of macho appearance, but inside it is really hard, and you're also having to sort of shore up your premiere. He or she, you've got a duty of care to them to make sure they're okay. Because if it's tough for you as a staffer, imagine what it's like if you're the actual person. No matter how tough you are, it's really difficult when everyone's kind of coming at you studs up. So it's really, really difficult. And then of course within the bunker, even these things can either bring you closer together, or it can also cause a lot of tension and fraction within the team as well. It's a nightmare. It's really horrific. And my sympathies are with, it is a nightmare situation. There's no denying it.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we do have to remember is that while we may well have our criticisms of what has been happening, what is happening, there are human beings at the heart of this. And you have to do a slight separation between, I care about these people and caring for them. We are, after all, the Party of Workers' Rights. But also, I also, as a party member, need to be able to say, this isn't good enough, it's not going well enough, what are you going to do about that?
Yeah.
And that's an enormous tension that they must feel too.
Absolutely. And I think one of the problems I think we've had in the past as a party is that we probably lean on too much of the sort of emotional and the personal connections, rather than sometimes taking quite a cool, objective look and saying, are we meeting our performance indicators, our KPIs?
Are we hitting our KPIs?
Are we hitting our KPIs? Sexy stuff here, really hot stuff. But, I think, but you're right. Look, it is difficult to separate the emotional from the kind of clinical professional. And that is politics, right? That is politics.
Absolutely. I mean, the human side of politics is something I've always really cared. My former business was called The Political Human.
Yeah, which I loved. I loved that title of your business. That was brilliant. And sometimes we forget that in politics.
And I think there's so often people go, but why is X talking to Y? They're in completely different faction. It's like they work alongside each other. They vote alongside each other on 99% of things. They have the shared values. They just have different interpretations of that. And it can be so easy to fall into those factional holes where you have to pretend to hate each other.
Well, I mean, let's go there, shall we? I mean, I do think that is something which has really beset the party. Yeah. I mean, we know that it's beset the party. You've written brilliantly. I mean, I love the stuff that you've written about this over, I'd say, the years, probably the decades, in terms of,
yes, folks, I am that old.
We both are, spring chickens here. And I think it is such a shame that we should have had a chance to sort of try and reinvent and reimagine. You're never going to erase those factions, of course you can't, and that's what makes the Labour Party this rich tapestry of the broad church, etc. But I think one of the things that people felt, or certainly I and many other people felt quite excited about Keir Starmer, was that he wasn't a creature of a faction.
No, absolutely.
And I think for a lot of people it was like, this is quite refreshing. Yeah. He's not somebody that's had like beef with somebody from like NUS from 20 years ago that they're relitigating. I
tell you, nothing drives me more potty in politics than people of my age, I'm 51, who are like, who's the next chair of the NUS? I'm like, you're 51. It's been about 30 years. Get over it.
Talking about some like fight and some election, some minor election for sort of like the social secretary position back in the day, and you're just like, really? So I think one of the things I really find heartbreaking about the situation that we're in, and angry, and I'm sure lots of people do as well, is I genuinely think when you look across the party, when you look across the PLP, when you look across the House of Lords, when you look across our mayors, when you look across our local government base, when you look across our trade union movement, we have got some absolutely brilliant people. Now, everybody is not from the same faction or the same tradition, but that's okay. There is, variety, and that's a good thing. And I do think if you look across every single political party that's around, hands down, we win on talent, right? No question. Like, I'd say, being very honest, because I always try to be honest. Like, I think Kemi Badenoch is performing well. I think she's way outperforming.
She's certainly got a lot better,
she's outperforming her entire party, right? Yeah. And everyone else is absolutely useless, and she's the only one that is kind of, doing anything. We've got so many good people, and I think one of the great tragedies is, why is it that yet again we have failed to kind of bring together because we have individual star players and we sort of can't seem to cohere as a team.
And I think that's true both for the people that people know, i.e. the MPs, the ministers, the front benchers,
the mayors,
yeah, of course,
mayors. I don't know if you heard about the mayors. They're like kind of a big deal.
Does Manchester have a mayor?
I don't know.
But also the talent behind the scenes as well. And I mean, one of the things that I really liked when Keir Starmer was running for leader was that there was talent from across the teams on that leadership campaign. You had, for example, Kat Fletcher, who'd previously worked for both Ed Miliband's leadership campaign and Jeremy Corbyn. You had... you had Morgan McSweeney, obviously, very much from the Labour right. You had Laura Parker, who was the national organiser of Momentum. They just took talented people. And I actually remember speaking to someone on one of the other campaigns who was quite cross because all of the people that they had been trying to hire had already been hired by Keir. And that was a moment, and I was like, oh, that's a really good signal to me as someone who wants to be a non-factional Labour voter, that this is what I'm buying into. But unfortunately, it just didn't seem to go that way.
No, we didn't end up with a government of all the talents in terms of like the Labour Party.
No, and even if we started out that way, each reshuffle seemed to become more and more narrowly factional. And that's not to say that anyone in particular is not talented from within those factions. But it is to say that if you just have one narrow point of view, it won't be challenged as much as it should be. And at the top of government, you should be challenged.
Oh, totally. I mean, I would say sort of groupthink and a kind of quashing of critical thinking has really done us a lot of damage.
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, I understand it because... as a journalist, you get edited, right? And you go through this process every time, and it's worse as a playwright, I can tell you, where somebody gives you feedback and your immediate response is, no, that's wrong. It's a punch in the guts. And it takes enormous amounts of discipline to take a breath and go, you know what, they've probably got a point. And my worry is that, such a structure has been built, and this is not just with one faction, all the factions do this. To the extent that if you are the person saying, hang on, I don't think that's quite right, instead of people going, you know what, you might have a point, they go, right, you're out. Purity thinking here only. But also, we are not developing that muscle of going, yeah, you probably got a point.
Totally. And I was speaking to, obviously, we're having many plethora of conversations over the last couple of days. But someone made this really good point because, you know, it's not just about changing the sort of face of, you know, whatever happens with this, you know, kind of shenanigans we're in now. But of course, it is the question about what are the policies, what's the vision, what's the values, what's the prospectus, what's the solutions to the big problems. And it does feel like we do a lot of bitching about what we don't like and who we don't like, but we aren't having in the party those sort of fizzing intellectual policy discussions and debates. And I think we have got to a stage where debate is seen as disloyalty. And somebody made the point that the party feels like for quite some time now, it's been denuded of its kind of policy making ability and skills and being able to flex that muscle, because there's so many horrendous structural problems that we face, and so much of that was inherited. Of course it was inherited.
Yeah, absolutely.
You cannot say that all of this is the fault. Of course you can. That's just a completely unintellectual argument. So in a way, you know, you need the best brains from across the movement to be thinking, spitballing so many different ideas. I mean, take defence spending, you know, which is like one of the huge challenges. And, you know, if there is a leadership challenge, you know, I don't know if that is going to happen, but that's one of the first questions that people are going to be asking. What's going to happen on defence spending? How are you going to pay for it? What's going to happen with this? And there's some really difficult questions. And I know, for example, in the Lords, there's been a lot of interesting discussions. A guy called John Eatwell, who's done some really interesting thinking on potentially looking at defence bonds, for example. I'm not saying that's the exact answer, but we should be having those kind of debates and discussions. But it feels like anything particularly to do with anything economic is completely squashed straight away. Squashed straight away going, you're an idiot, we can't do that because, you know, the fiscal rules. Of course the fiscal rules are important. We all get that we're not idiots. And of course the bond markets, we get that. But it's like, you're not allowed to have any discussion around any imaginative thinking. Is everything to be squashed straight away? And, you know...
that's exactly right. We have to have fiscal rules that give us a structure, but they can't be a straitjacket. And that is how it's felt intellectually at times, I think. Look, I'm no economist. I think my bank manager would be the first one to
I think we can both be like,
yeah,
we're probably not the kind of more economics.
I'm a comms person. I can comm your economics but I can give you a great headline on them. But ultimately, you need to have a little bit of both. And I think we've lent too much into a very strict messaging structure and which is ironically stymied the intellectual structure rather than saying, we know how to talk about these things, so let's talk about these things. You mentioned being in the House of Lords. Now, we don't know if there's going to be a leadership contest or not. If there is, what role do peers play in that? Will you be part of the nominations process?
No, I don't think so. I'm not the expert on the rules, but I don't think so. I think it is, and rightly so. I think it's mainly contained to the elected.
Because you can't even vote.
We can't even vote on election day. I mean, I was really excited at local, so I get to go and get my little pencil and, go to the little primary school. No, I mean, and it's not right. We're unelected. People have our views and things, but we are unelected, and the primacy should be with the MPs.
Now, obviously...
And the members, of course, but,
the
we're just
role
part
of the House of Lords has come under quite a lot of scrutiny in recent months, particularly around the assisted dying bill. Now, I think we'll go down a
Yes.
very, very
Let's
deep
not.
cul-de-sac if we were to talk about that. But I think I'm more interested in talking about how you, as a fairly new peer, first of all, did you get any induction, any
No,
training?
nothing.
You were just
I mean,
sort of thrown in, given the
thrown
ermine.
in, yeah, I mean, it's a very weird and wonderful place, but if I'm really honest, it is very dysfunctional. It does provide a very important function, and that is, I did a great interview with John McFall, who was the outgoing speaker, who is just fantastic, just a brilliant parliamentarian, and what a life steeped in public service and the best of politics. And he had this great analogy, which is like the House of Lords is like a sort of washing machine. It kind of like washes up the sort of, you know, the kind of slightly dirty laundry that comes up in legislation. And it is hard because, you know, even though there's a big majority, there's not a lot of legislative scrutiny. There's not a huge amount of scrutiny that gets done. Also, with a very big majority, there's not
There's
that
probably
much.
less with a big majority,
Yeah,
right?
there's less pushback. So, you know, the Lords does end up getting quite a lot of legislation that is quite structurally weak, and it does do a really important function to make it better. And that's the Lords at its best, with people with real expertise. I think fewer political axes to grind. You know, people who've got the time and the expertise and the temperament to sort of go through the fine print and the T's and C's to make sure that it's all kind of robust. And I think we lose that at our peril. I think that's the big argument for the House of Lords. Where I think the House of Lords is really falling down is, and maybe some people might think this is hypocritical of me because some people might think I'm a crony, and fair play. That's a fair criticism of me if I'd accept that. I think there should be fewer political. It should not be a sort of reward for any party, right? It shouldn't be a kind of a place for reward. It should be people, in my view, who are independent-minded, who will do critical thinking, and who will kind of look at, you know, is this legislation in the right place, and is this could more be done with this legislative vehicle? And I think that is really important. I think there should be probably fewer. I think the House of Lords should be smaller. I think it should be fewer party political appointments. I think more crossbench appointments. An idea that I kind of have had discussions with people about maybe even almost like visiting professors, like, you know, peers that come in for a period of time, maybe to work on specific pieces of legislation where we're very deficient. For example, AI is huge. We're not exactly blessed with people who can, you know, really understand.
That's Martha Lane Fox, and that's it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Beeben Kidron is an amazing person on this. And the other thing, which I think, and we don't want to go down the assisted dying sort of cul-de-sac, but one of the things that I think we're really seeing, personally, I don't think self-regulation is working anymore. I think you're seeing lots of people who are just killing time, if you pardon the pun, by filibustering on lots of different issues. And you know, there was some good challenge brought on the assisted dying, absolutely, but there was also some people who I think did, you know, kind of take the mick on it. But there's other things as well. You know, I think there should be an active speaker in the same way that they have in the House of Commons. I think there should be time limits. I just don't think people should be able to sort of talk endlessly on, you know, random amendments. I don't think good decisions get made at 2:00 in the morning. I think
I've made some of my best decisions.
Maybe not legislative decisions. I think keeping lots of members of the House of Lords there till 1:00. People were there till 4:00 in the. I mean, that is elderly abuse, right? That is literally elderly abuse. So I think there's a lot. I think there should be many, many more people from across the country. It's so London centric, from different backgrounds. So there's a lot of things I would change. I mean, it really needs radical reform in my view.
I mean, it's based in Parliament. You have this sort of central lobby, and then you either go that way or that way. How much interaction is there between the peers and the MPs, or is it kind of we do our job, you do your job?
There isn't very much interaction, and I think
so. We could put the House of Lords in Birmingham then, if we wanted to.
You could do. I mean, I think where it's helpful is where, you know, where there's big policy debate and there are meetings between ministers and MPs and peers. And I think that is very, very important. I would like there to be more of that. I mean, going back to our talking about team building and capacity building earlier, just as we were saying that, you know, we'd like to have more working across the factions and the tribes of the Labour Party, I would like to see more like working between MPs and peers, and also there's a lot of peers in there who've got so much amazing experience. They've been ministers, they've run councils, they've done things. I would like to see ministers sort of and special advisors engage with them a bit more in terms of that early bit of policy development, so maybe there's not so many mistakes down the track.
Just as a momentary advertisement, for those of you watching live, you will be excited to know that LabourList are relaunching our Labour Tribes tool tomorrow morning. It is the best way of understanding the different groupings and factions within the Parliamentary Labour Party. So that was a lovely way of allowing me to promote that. And a huge thank you to our amazing journalist, Dan Green, who has put all the data together and has just made that such a useful thing. So if you're walking around Westminster tomorrow and everyone's on their laptop looking at one particular site, that'll be the one they're looking at.
I love it. Can't wait to see which tribe I'm in.
I don't think we've got peers yet.
What?
Hey, there's always room for iteration.
For growth.
So we've talked a little bit about the House of Lords, but you have written a book, co-written a book, about one very specific element of the House of Commons that probably embodies what I would say the general public think is the worst part of politics. Would that be fair? And what am I referring to there?
You're talking about Punch and Judy politics, Prime Minister's questions. So I'm going to respectfully push back on you.
Okay.
So I think PMQs is often referred to as like a terrible part of PMQs, but of Parliament, but it shouldn't be. I think it should be one of the best bits of Parliament, because we're very unique in this democracy in the sense that the prime politician, the Prime Minister, nowhere else in the world does the Prime Minister every week get summoned to the same spot in Parliament and they have to take questions for, half an hour plus on any topic from, randomly from any of the MPs across the country. And I think that is a really important function of our democracy. Now, you can argue that no questions get answered and all that, but I think don't knock the entire, institution for the fact that, people are not very good at it anymore. And I do think that in an era where we get to edit and manipulate and AI and social media, that's how we're doing our politics now. And I think that's really dangerous because politics is the art of communication, and it should be in the wheelhouse and the skill set of our top leading politicians to stand at the dispatch box without any help from anyone else, no script, no auto cue, them in the moment with their wit, their brain, their heart, their values, their voice, their intellect, their humour, being able to debate. And I think we've really lost the art of debate. Now, I'm not saying that PMQs is a brilliant forum for debate, but it should be. And when you think back to those kind of vintage clashes between, let's say, William Hague and Tony Blair and David Cameron and all of that sort of thing, I think we should, instead of just slagging off PMQs, I think we should encourage our leaders to raise their game at PMQs.
I think that's a really reasonable point, actually.
Thanks.
First one you've made so far, obviously.
She's like, finally, because it's been a while, so we've been wanging on.
But I think if PMQs worked better, it would be great. It is unfortunate that a lot of people see it as the moment for clipping something for the socials. And so you get being a little obsequious, shall we say?
Oh, I'm sorry, they are the worst.
Yeah.
Honestly, they are the worst. The kind of sliming up to the Prime Minister or the leader of the opposition, it's like, let's make this thing bad.
And so I think if there were kind of stricter rules about what can and should be asked, maybe. But I do agree that the ability of the lowliest backbencher from the furthest flung constituency to be able to ask the Prime Minister something that really matters to them is really important, and I think is a symbol of a working democracy. I just worry that we don't actually make the best of it.
We don't, and that is I'm afraid, on the leaders, in terms of they, have gone down they've gone sort of down that track. And you're right about the clipping, and that is sadly a new phenomenon. It's a bit like right in the beginning, you know, Neil Kinnock and Margaret Thatcher, I think, were both reluctant for the TV cameras to come into Parliament, because they were like, oh, it's all going to become a bit of a soap opera. So I suppose at that era, I remember Prime Minister's Questions was very, very different back in the day. It was twice a week, just for 15 minutes. And when Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister at that point, you didn't even have to answer the question as Prime... Now, you could argue Prime Ministers still don't answer the question, but you could just stand up and say that my Housing Secretary will write to you, or, you know, my Defence Secretary will write to you, and that's as bland as it got. To be fair to Margaret Thatcher, she's the kind of godmother of modern Prime Ministers' questions, in the sense that she said, right, I'm actually going to answer all the questions, and I want to use that as a vehicle to get information from across Whitehall. It was actually a very good device for her very curious mind about what was going on in politics and policy around Whitehall, because she's like, I have to answer the question on this, so I need the information.
So I need to know.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the thing. The other thing about it is that we watch it for half an hour on a Wednesday, and then we all go off and do a scorecard and basically act like theatre reviewers. But there's so much more preparation that goes into it. And I think in the book you talk about what the value of that is actually politically far beyond that half an hour.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I suppose, like, you know, it's a huge amount of time. And of course, it got moved from being twice a week to once a week, partly because the amount of prep that had to, you know, whether you're prepping for half an hour, 15 minutes, actually you're doing a huge amount of prep. So it's more efficient to prep for one session. It is a nightmare, and it does take up a lot of time. But the flip side is it keeps you match fit, right? In the sense that if you are the Prime Minister, you should really be across quite a lot of things that are going on, because, you know, it's good to be kept on your toes. And I think that's certainly how she saw it. And it, you know, even, I mean, Blair said that he did used to sort of dread it, but, you know, it did give him a lot of range across all the different topics. I mean, Margaret Thatcher also, I mean, this was all told to me by John Whittingdale, who used to work for her and helped prep her. She said it was very useful for those long form interviews she did with the kind of Brian Waldens and all that kind of thing. You know, it felt, you know, she felt she was sort of quite in, there was a rigor to it, which I think is important. I think, you know, it is a bit annoying, and it does take up a lot of time. But if you're the top man or woman, you should be expected to sort of try to be on top of things as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about it a little bit. You worked for Ed Miliband for quite a lot of his time as leader of the opposition. Is that right?
Yes.
So when Ed was campaigning...
I didn't work on his campaign.
Yeah, no, but one of the sort of things that was said about Ed, and it was said as a subtle comparison, perhaps with David Miliband, Ed speaks human. And that was kind of one of his big selling points. What happened? Because either side of his leadership, there is this interesting, charming, clever, curious guy. As our readers know, he tops our LabourList cabinet rankings.
Millie fandom is back.
The Millie fandom is alive and well.
The Millieverse is back.
But he just didn't seem to manage to capture that while he was leader. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I do. It's the curse of leadership, right? It's the curse of leadership. You have to be such a robust person to cope with the stresses and strains and, like, the now even more rapacious, intense scrutiny of being a leader. And I think I defy even the most confident of people to be able to just walk into that sort of spotlight and just sort of be, and the great tragedy is, although, I'm afraid you have to suck it up if you want to be a leader. That is part of the gig, unfortunately. What's really difficult, and maybe it is also a thing of our type of politics, Labour politics, and it's partly because we don't win power often, so the stakes are so high when you become leader.
And we're unself-confident.
And we're very self-critical, and we're very punishing and, all that sort of thing. So, we take somebody and we're like, yeah, this person's really cool and they're great, and then they get into the spotlight of leadership. And of course, the press is obviously very, very hard on Labour leaders. The press is hard on all leaders, to be fair. But I think something does happen to Labour leaders where they do absolutely kind of crumble under the scrutiny. And the thing which becomes so hard is to be your authentic self. That suddenly becomes, and you'll know as somebody who has a great background in hinterland in theatre and performance and all that sort of thing, the best way to perform is to be your authentic self. And suddenly, but being your authentic self when you're in this unforgiving, relentless scrutiny, that's the most difficult thing to do. And
particularly, presumably, when 17 different people are telling you how to be a different version of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so much of this also goes to how self-confident you are as a person, what your kind of inner core is. I mean, I think very few people have got that. Like, obviously, Blair had it in spades. I think Cameron had it.
Possibly too much.
Yeah, possibly too much. Obviously, I think Boris Johnson did have it, like on a...
Way too much.
Yeah, but, and I think in a way, the people who don't have it, they're good, decent people, and they do think about things deeply, and they are self-critical because they are, they're not, as you say, kind of big swaggering, I'm the big I am, and I've got this hubristic, kind of character. But it is hard, and I do think that to be a good leader and an effective leader in this climate, you do have to have an incredibly thick skin. You do have to be able to try and remain connected with your authentic self. You have to sort of slightly not care in a way, which is really, if you care deeply about these things, it will affect you on quite a personal level. But obviously, he's now back living his best life.
He really is. And running his best ministry.
Oh, yeah. I mean, whatever you say about him, there's loads of people. I had the misfortune of I have spent 10 hours with Nadeem Zahawi over the last... I know.
God love you for it. And B, I can tell you that before you arrived, our team were absolutely singing your praises for how you handled him. So well done on that.
Thank you. But it was interesting because clearly the Reform have like a script of kind of three things. Yeah. Number one is obviously the small boats. Yeah. Number two is all your public services are ruined by the small boats and immigration. And the third thing is the madness of Ed Miliband's net zero. That's like their kind of three script
Actually, you got it wrong, because apparently, and these are patriots who apparently believe in the English language, it's net stupid zero.
Yeah, of course. Sorry.
Like, how make that make sense?
But it's interesting how they're really, really, really focusing on Ed Miliband, and I see this a lot as well from the right-wing press. And what's interesting is...
It hasn't worked.
Well, I think that probably depends on where you sit on the political spectrum. But I think what's interesting, because I have many people on my radio show who are centre-right, and they are not fans of Ed Miliband, right? But the point is, what's interesting about Ed Miliband is whether you love or hate him, he's undeniable right now, right? Yeah. He has grabbed that department. He's gone back to his sort of home in a way. I know officials there who worked with him all those years ago. They are delighted to have him back. They were saying that when he arrived in the department and sort of gave them the pep talk, it wasn't just a platitudinous pep talk. It was, right, we're doing this.
Yeah.
He had a plan. He had, one of the great and justified criticisms of this new Labour government, obviously not new Labour, but this Labour government, relatively new Labour government, is that pretty much zero planning had gone in, and that is a fair criticism. Yeah. That does not apply to Ed Miliband.
No, and I think that's why our readers always vote. Because if you look at the disparity between should he be the next leader and is he your favourite cabinet minister, what's clear is they think he's delivering. And he's delivering on a Labour priority. What I meant when I said I don't think the attacks are working is that if you poll immigration, right, you will not hear an answer back that us liberal, lefty, North London, East London in my case, types...
South London.
...want to hear.
Yeah.
That is not true when you poll about net zero policy. Now, there'll be things on the edge. Should we be doing it faster, slower? Should we be drilling in the North Sea? Those are slightly different areas. But in terms of the overall policy area, it actually has remained remarkably popular.
I think, sadly, I think the sort of rabid right-wingers on this are starting to nibble. I think it is a contentious issue again, sadly. I think there was a period where net zero was not politically contested. And, you know, fair play to the Conservatives. They also, you know, did heavy lifting on it.
And I think,
you know,
May did some very good stuff on
absolutely.
it.
And, you know, Boris Johnson as well. And in fact, that's one of the things they get criticised for now, right? But I think one of the great tragedies is that it has become a politically kind of contested area. But that doesn't take away from the fact that Ed Miliband is absolutely clear on what his agenda is. He's cracking forward. I think one of the reasons the agenda, and he is so attacked, is that it's one area...
Because it's working.
And progress has been made, whether you agree with it or not, progress. And, you know, I had somebody say to me, I think it was meant to be a kind of criticism of the policy, but actually I said it's a kind of backhanded compliment. They were like, you know, all of this stuff is moving so fast that, you know, even future governments aren't going to be able to roll it back. And I said, that's what real change looks like.
Absolutely.
And then this person actually did concede.
That's the difference between the minimum wage and Sure Start, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they couldn't undo the minimum wage.
And, you know, this energy revolution is the sort of thing which, you know, in 30 years' time, people will look back and say this was a really important legacy thing. I also think the building of nuclear power stations is really important as well.
I mean, I will freely admit I've done a complete 180 on that in my 20 years in politics. I used to be very anti-nuclear power. Now, in terms of climate change, we've just got to do it.
Totally. And also, that's one of those really good examples of when you don't take these big decisions, like Nick Clegg 20 years ago going, who cares about nuclear? And, you know, it's not even going to come on stream until 20 years. Now, 20 years later, we're like, Nick, I really wish we'd sort of all collectively pulled our fingers out 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that you've always been very vocal about is the role of women in politics. I'm not going to ask you what the future holds in terms of Labour leadership, but why have we never elected a woman as leader?
Where to begin? Where to begin? So, all right, I think it's born out of the fact that we're not very good at winning elections. So when it comes to choosing our leader, we think, right, what is the least frightening optic?
Yeah.
And that is a kind of nice white man with a nice wife.
Looks a bit like a bank manager.
Yeah, and 2.4 children. And I mean, if he's got a military connection, all the better. Like,
oh my God, we are. Yes.
Like, I mean, that's and that is because that's not because we're like horrible bad people. It's because I think we think in our sort of groupthink
it's that insecurity again.
It's insecurity. It's like we hardly win elections, so we need something which is not going to scare the horses and what like normal people think leadership looks like, right? So that's I think where it comes from. Second thing is I think this applies not just to women, but I think it applies across the piece. We are so criminally bad at talent building and capacity building, and lots of people who are good get shot down really early. The kind of tall poppy syndrome is real. I think there are so many brilliant women that, you know, could do it. And, you know, but obviously everyone needs a bit of help and needs a bit of guidance and a team and all that sort of thing. But yeah, and I just also think as well, the kind of horrible reality is I think we are culturally still really macho. I think we are still really quite macho and masculine I think we are, funnily enough, the trade union movement is changing because actually it's not so much the brothers, it's the sisters now in terms of like senior women and, you know, fair play to them. But I think within the party, and you know I've talked about this a lot, not just front of house, but power behind the throne.
Oh, absolutely. What's your phrase?
Bob, Tom and Simon.
Bob, Tom and Simon. I think we have to add in a Josh now.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. A little Josh in there now. Definitely. And I do think that is an issue, and I think we also so I think the kind of men still gatekeep a lot in our party, and what they are definitely better at doing is allowing women through front of house roles and behind the scenes, but the men kind of still are the dominant. Like, has there ever been a female Alistair Campbell? No.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a female Morgan McSweeney? No. I mean, and there's some really good women
who would be fantastic at those jobs. Yeah,
but you know, women are not allowed to have that kind of
Svengali
status. Yeah, and Svengali and all that kind of thing. And women do a lot of, in order to get, and I've talked a lot about the getting into the room and how important it is to have women in the room. A lot of women sort of get in the room by being really functional and performing a function to get into the room, and they sort of get to their sort of position by performing a function rather than being a sort of strategic Svengali, even though loads of them would be brilliant at doing that. But what gives me some sort of hope is, I think women in the Labour Party are getting braver, and I do think they're getting better at saying, I'm not standing up for this anymore. I think Angela Rayner has been brilliant on this. I think she is a really, really strong voice. She's not played nice. No. And I really respect her for that in many ways, because I think, a lot of us in the Women Labour Party, we've been indoctrinated, and I get it, to be the good girls, and you can,
the yes women,
and play nice, and then you can get senior.
I remember reading a fascinating article that I recognised from a lot of my time in politics, of the job of a woman is to be the person who picks up behind a charismatic man.
I love that. Absolutely.
And yes, because those charismatic guys that we've all worked for, they are interesting and they smash things up, and then you have to sort of sweep along afterwards going, I'm really sorry.
Or the other thing I would say is the number of brilliant women who trail behind kind of the strategy boys, right?
Yeah, the boys in suits.
Boys in suits who never have to print, they don't understand where the printer is or how to print anything off or anything. And I always was struck by
and they make that a virtue of themselves.
It's absolutely fine. It's like it's just them, they're shambolic and all that kind of thing. And they're often sort of flanked or as part of their team as an absolutely brilliant, razor sharp, whip smart woman who's got everything and is printing everything out and is on top of everything, and you sort of think, when is she going to have her moment? But what I would also say, I mean, I don't want to get into the leadership kind of cul-de-sac, but one thing I do think is interesting is that if you look at some of the big moments that have happened in this parliament so far, welfare reform, it was women that led it, and it was middle-aged, older, menopausal women who led it. And I think that's partly because I think some of the boys who in the strategy and all that stuff, they didn't even see them. These women were literally invisible to them. Yeah. You look at someone like Emily Thornberry, who's did a brilliant kind of turn in the some of the chairs of the select committee are absolutely brilliant. And even this thing, look who's actually putting their head above the parapet. I mean, whatever you think of what Catherine West has done, she was the one that put her head above the parapet. Absolutely. Jess Phillips, Miata Fambula, Alex Davies-Jones, it is actually interesting how it's been quite a lot of women who are, I mean, I say that without prejudice in terms of what happens with this, but it is interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're coming fairly close to the end of our time. I do have one question in. Obviously, I think we've probably been talking about the things that our listeners would have been asking about, because everyone's talking about one thing at the moment.
I wonder what that is.
But I have got a question that came in from John Bingley, where he says, number 10 seems to have a fixation on appealing to working people. Surely it would be smarter to appeal to the whole electorate, including retired, students, carers, disabled, and those aged, he says 16 plus, but I think he probably means under 16.
I think it's such a great point, and I've just come from something where we were debating the kind of inanity of political language, and this working people thing is so interesting because it just sounds like political word salad. Like, what does it? I mean, nobody can really define. Working people is such a. Does that mean 9 to 5? Who has a 9 to 5 job anymore? Lots of people work at different stages in their life. Lots of people do flex. It's those kind of things which I think don't help our sort of politics. Of course, you've got to talk to the stresses and strains that people face, but not everybody has the same working pattern. I mean, one of my bugbears, going back to my kind of feminist hat on, is the amount of pressure put on, middle-aged women and men increasingly now in terms of that sandwich gap, looking after kids. And now it's not like you're done with your kids now when they're 18. In fact, because housing pressures, you're actually stuck with your kids now often into their 20s, almost their 30s. And you've got this nightmare with adult social care and looking after elderly relatives and navigating the care system and, maybe having to cut back on your hours. There's a whole different spectrum of work and responsibilities now, and we should be speaking to that more.
Absolutely, 100%. So you as one of your many, many hats, I have watched you on stage at a 1,000-seater theatre, standing alone in a spotlight, telling jokes for an hour. That's impressive. Because I tried it for 5 minutes above a pub in Stoke Newington, and it's the most terrified I've ever been.
I'm just like a totally deranged psychopathic show off, basically. That's like, you write brilliant plays, which I could never do. I'm so impressed by what you do.
But how much of that humour and that training in humour were you able to bring into the political communications? Because obviously humour is a really strong, powerful tool when used well.
I think humour is what got me my place in politics, and I'm really proud of that. I think that's what gave me my USP, because I was fighting really hard to get noticed in a very competitive, aggressive field of advisors, obviously mainly men. I think I was maybe one of the only few ethnic minority, the thing that gave me a USP was humour and that background. And of course that made me, help with PMQs. I think one of the things I feel most proud of, and she is incredibly generous about this as well, is, Harriet Harman is really funny, but I think I helped her develop her humour, and nobody sort of thought of, Harriet was very meanly called Harriet Harperson, ha ha ha, not funny at all. But that first time she went up against William Hague, everyone was like, he's going to absolutely rinse her. No one thought, and I was like, we have got to use humour, and she was really nervous about it. And I was like, he's going to come after you. You've got to have a really funny rejoinder. And she knocked it out of the park. And that kind of really... So, and I, worked closely with Ed in terms of his conference speeches and PMQs. And so I think we should have more humour in how we do our communications, not stand up, not like horrendous. But sometimes we make such heavy weather of our political comms, right? Yeah. And you'll know this from your brilliant work that you've done. We sound so earnest and boring and like
well, we also sound focus groups.
Oh my God, we sound like progressive word salad, and it's like
they call it, a camel is a horse designed by committee. I think a lot of our communication sometimes is a bit of a camel.
And I would like us to have a bit more of a lightness of touch. I'm not saying go out there and be like, hey, let's go for the giggles kind of thing, not at all. But there is humour can be really good, and self-deprecating humour can be really powerful.
So. Who is your hero in politics?
Oh, that's a good question. It's slightly cringy, but I do think Harriet Harman is a really brilliant person in politics. And I think lots of people have a legacy after they've long left politics. And normally,
she's back again.
Oh God, I know, look who's back. I mean, there was rumours that Chukwuemeka was being cited. I mean, it's really quite could be quite a retro, who knows. But she is, and she's done so much to help not just women in the Labour Party, and she is really non-factional as well, which I think is brilliant. But I remember after we lost the election in 2010, and that was a crushing moment, and she was the first time she was acting leader, and we had to do this thing where she did this big speech to all new MPs, not just Labour MPs or the ones that were left, but the new Conservatives and things like that. And she was so brilliant. And she said to particularly the women there, she said, look, don't keep your head down. Don't wait for a certain amount of time before you cause trouble or you make your, unreasonable demands. And if you ever need any help or advice, come and see me. And the number of Tory women who said to me, do you know what, that was so inspiring. We didn't get anything from the Conservative Party on that front. And so many women have gone from the Conservative side to ask Harriet for advice behind the scenes. So she's definitely up there. Who else I think is a kind of... I do think you've got to give due respect to Tony Blair for... We are finding it so hard. We find it so hard to win power and stay in, as we're proving, stay in power. Whatever you think of, Iraq and all of that stuff, which I'm not, it's obviously a big thing. You've got to give him his ability to have a kind of clear vision and to be such a brilliant political communicator. I do think that in terms of Labour politics stands out for me. But there's other people I really admire in politics from different sides. I mean, even though I fundamentally disagree with independence, and I wouldn't want Scotland to go independent, and a lot of my Labour colleagues might get cross. You know, I had a lot of time for Nicola Sturgeon. You know, I know a lot of people get really cross about that. I think she was a really interesting political figure. I think she, you know, personally, I think, you know, she was a very interesting woman. I really enjoyed her biography. I thought it was a fascinating read. So yeah, there's lots of and I have to say, I mean, very cheesy, but I just did come back from Boston, got a bit misty-eyed at the JFK Library, I'm afraid. Just the speeches and the oratory.
No, fair. So final question: what was there a book or a film or a particular moment, something that made you think, yes, that's who I'm going to be, that's what I want to be?
Probably Terry from The Thick of It. I thought, that's me.
That's me.
That's me.
Joanna Scanlon has a lot to answer for. Ayesha, I don't think we can top that, so I'm going to sign off there. It's been an absolutely fascinating...
Oh, thank you so much. I just want to say you're doing such a brilliant job. LabourList is just so brilliant. You are working all tirelessly. You're doing such a brilliant job on it.
I'm blessed with a fantastic team, so they make me look good, which is hard work. Thank you, Ayesha Hazarika. It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you.
Thank you.